Good morning. And as always, remember, this is the day the Lord's made. I'll be glad and I'll rejoice in it. You should too. It's a great day. You say, well, it's hot. Not as hot as it could be. Listen, I've preached all over 1 Kings, chapter 18 and 19, in the past month. However, I have one more sermon, because I left poor old Elijah hanging there in a kind of a limbo of depression when Queen Jezebel threatened to have him killed. And as I said in time before last, I believe it was, there are two kinds of depression. There's clinical depression, where the chemicals in your brain get messed up, or your brain stops producing these chemicals, or your body stops producing the chemicals to feed your brain. And there's medicine that you can take to offset that and to help that out, and I thank God for that. But the other kind of depression is spiritual depression, and today I'm really not going to address those. I'm not going to look at that kind of issue. But what we're going to look at is 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 41 through 45, which says, Then Elijah said to Ahab, Go up, eat, drink, for there's a sound of abundance of rain. Now, let me say this. First of all, if you recall, or maybe you didn't watch the other videos, but what's going on is Elijah prayed that it would not rain. Now, he did this because God told him to. He prayed that it would not rain or even dew come up on the ground for 3 years. Now, 3 years have passed, and it's a bad, bad famine in the area. And now Elijah's telling him, hey, check it out, Ahab. You might as well go ahead and eat and drink and have a good time, because I hear a sound of abundance of rain. And it says in verse 42, So Ahab went up and ate and drank, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, the mountain. Then he bowed down to the ground and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, Go up now, look toward the sea. So he went up and looked and said, There's nothing. In other words, nothing has changed in the last 3 years. And 7 times Elijah told him, Go again, go again. And it came to pass that on the 7th time, he said, There's a cloud, small as a man's hand, rising up out of the sea. So he said, Go up and say to Ahab, Prepare your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Now, it hadn't rained in 3 years. And he had told Ahab, Go ahead and have your party, but I hear the sound of abundance of rain. And then when this one little bitty cloud comes up out of the sea, he tells his servant, Go tell Ahab, get ready. You better get out of here, because your chariot's going to get stuck in the mud from the rain. Now, that's a Ray White paraphrase, I know. But in verse 45 it says, And it happened in the meantime that the sky became black with clouds, and the wind, and there was a heavy rain. So Ahab rode away and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord came on Elijah. I love this. The hand of the Lord came on Elijah, and he girded up his loins, and he ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Now listen, the bottom line is they were both going to Jezreel. Now remember, Ahab took off in a chariot being pulled by at least one, but probably 2 horses. I mean, that's a sports car of that day. And here Elijah pulls his robe up and ties it so he can run, and he takes off running and outruns the chariot. Supernatural event. I love that. Well, I want us to look at this event today, and I want you to notice something. First of all, notice a dry and thirsty land. Now then, for those of us here in the UP, it's difficult for us to imagine how life gets turned upside down when there's no water. We are surrounded by water. Even when it's dry, we have an abundance of water. Matter of fact, sometimes we can't mow for the amount of water. We, here in the UP, can only get a glimpse during an occasional storm that causes the power to go out and also knocks out our water. Everybody in our area, we're all on wells, so if the power goes out, we have no water. We can't flush our toilets, we can't take a shower or wash our clothes. It sort of makes us housebound because we don't want to go out stinking. We don't want to go out having bad breath because we can't even wash our teeth or brush our teeth. I always tell Jane, my wife, it looks like a storm's coming because I have radar on my computer, and as I watch it, I see a storm coming. I say, there's a storm coming. Draw up some extra water, and we'll draw up 3 or 4 gallons of water, or maybe if it's a small storm, 1 gallon, in case the power does go off. Now, I heard someone say one time, boy, we need rain because it's getting dry. And I looked out on the road and I said, with a comeback, I said, you don't know dry. Go out west. Here you think it's dry when the pavement isn't wet. Out there, there's no water. Many times this time of the year, there's not even water in the rivers or the lakes. They're all dried up. Now then, we lived out in southwest Colorado for almost 20 years, and in that time we went through a 5-year drought while we were out there. And I mean where the only moisture we got was from the snowfall, and we didn't get hardly any snow compared to other years. And folks, it was dry. I'm talking about when you walk on green grass and it crunches under your feet. That's dry. Now, when there's no water to our homes, it's a moderate inconvenience. But this experience is pale in comparison to what it was like for Israel during that drought. After 3 years, it was every man for himself. They expected to suffer, to go without, eventually to die because there was no end in sight. Without water, food becomes scarce. People, as well as animals, began to dehydrate and starve and die. It's likely the people were fighting just to survive. I mean, I'm talking about neighbor rising up against neighbor and friend against friend in order to survive. Now, that is a physical drought. Now let's look at life's dry seasons. Most of us can relate to the kind of drought that I just talked about, at least on a short period of time or whatever. But probably, well, let me back up and say, in reality, those here in the UP can't relate to that kind of drought. They read about them, but they don't have a clue. But I think everyone can relate to a spiritual drought. It's a dry season in our lives when things just don't feel right. There seems to be an emptiness inside us. Maybe a dry season in a marriage when a spouse feels more like a distant friend than a spouse. And by the way, I think every marriage goes through those times. Things get hectic, people get busy, and they stop working on the marriage. Folks, if that happens, get back in communication with your spouse and don't let it go all the way to the end. It may be a dry season in our finances. You know, when we're just barely making it from paycheck to paycheck. Jane and I have gone through some of those. And it's not fun. Or it may be a dry season professionally when your chosen career is no longer challenging or satisfying. Even a dry season in our relationship with God can happen. And we just don't feel His presence. Our prayers don't seem to connect to Him. We wander away from the fellowship with the body of Christ, that is, the church. By the way, it's during those dry seasons that it's really easy to stop, to get out of the habit, I'll put it that way, of going to church. And we just have a tendency to dry up. It's a drought, not a physical drought, not of physical water, but where there's no living water. It's the emptiness it causes that creates a hole that we want to fix. But how? No matter what we try, we keep doing the same thing again and again, feeling hopeless and helpless. But be encouraged. When we're in this place, that dry season, that time when it seems like we're not close to God, we can take a lesson from Elijah. A lesson on ending the drought and experiencing the abundance of rain. But we must tune our hearing. I think everybody knows I've got a 1962 Corvair. Now, some of you don't even know what a Corvair is. It was made by Chevrolet, air-cooled engine in the rear. And it's a lot of fun to drive. But it has the top of the line in 1962, a push-button deluxe AM radio. And some of you don't even know what an AM radio is. But anyway, I've noticed nowadays I can't get a station on it. Why? Maybe there's no AM stations around here. If I do, I got to tune it very carefully, and then it'll wander in and out. We've got to tune our ears. We've got to tune our hearing like tuning that radio. I want you to listen to verse 41. Then Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of abundance of rain." Elijah could hear it, Ahab couldn't. Ahab wasn't tuned to hearing it. Everyone saw the devastating drought, but Elijah heard the promise of God. He heard the sound of abundance of rain. He tuned his hearing into the goodness of God. No matter how far you drift from God, He's always speaking to our spirits of better things to come. And by the way, it always starts with an if. We've got to tune our hearing. He's forever giving us instructions and pictures of what he has for us, especially when life looks hopeless. During hopeless situations, there's a voice inside my spirit that keeps telling me, not of what is, not of my circumstances, but of what God promised. I've learned the importance of disciplining myself to listen, to tune in the sound and tune out the sight. But I must keep working at it. It's not something that comes automatically. You have to make up your mind and be committed. That's how faith works, by the way. If we're going to get out of a spiritual drought, we must be tuned in to the sound of the Spirit and not focus on the sight of the circumstances. Indeed, we walk by faith in God's promises, not by sight. Then we need to push through in prayer. Verse 42, Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. Then he bowed down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Now, I'm going to use an illustration that some of you may not care for, but any person who's witnessed a birth recognizes this position. When a woman's contractions get to a certain point, she must push through until the baby comes. And on the same token, in the Spirit, the contractions are the voice of the Spirit that we hear. When God is speaking to us. But to birth the sound into something that we can see, it must get into the birthing position. Well, what is that birthing position? It's prayer. Prayer is where we push past everything that's holding us back. Prayer is where everything built by the enemy comes down. Prayer is where we weaken what the enemy strengthens. Prayer pushes away hindrances and breaks through to God's promise. To end the drought, we see a sound become reality. It's birthed in prayer. And finally, we need to dare to start. You can't take a journey, no matter how long or how short, until you take the first step. Verse 43, I want you to notice, he said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." So he went up and looked and said, "There's nothing." Until now, Elijah and his servant were surrounded by nothing but drought. It's likely their routine was the same day in and day out every day. Drink as little as possible to save some water for tomorrow. Expend as little energy as possible so that you need less water. The same routine every day, day in and day out. Isn't that what happens when we get stuck in a spiritual drought? We do the same unproductive things every day. The same bad diet that keeps us fat. The same laying on the same couch all day that keeps us out of shape and depressed. Working every day with the same bad attitude that brings no promotions and possibly loss of job. There's the same that's lame, and it'll keep you stuck in a drought. What we need is a new kind of same. In other words, we need to have a new regime of habitual regime and habit forming. Elijah told the servant, "Go look toward the sea." He was in essence telling him, today we're going to start a new same. Today, forget about conserving energy and to save water. Today, you're going to look out over the sea, and I'm going to pray, and we're going to see the situation change. Can you imagine what the servant was thinking? He said, "What are you talking about? I have no energy. I'm dehydrated. That's a long way to go to look out over the sea. And I'm not sure I can make it that far." Listen, don't resist new things. Even, let me say this, it's human nature. And by the way, it is really the nature of Christians to resist any change, any new thing. I just shared this with our youth minister. I said, you can change the direction a church is going. But it's like changing the direction of a battleship. You can only change it 1 degree at a time. Because if you try to make a sharp turn, you'll break it in half. Same way with the church. Now then, we resist new things. Even if it's needed to get us out of a drought, we resist it. You know, we say, well, we'll start a diet Monday. Well, Monday comes and we don't start it, do we? Well, next Monday we will. I know. I'm going to start going to the gym New Year's. I didn't say which New Year, but New Year's. By the way, let me say this. I've heard people tell me, God understands. I was too busy this morning to pray, read my Bible, or to go to church. Yeah, try telling God that. I'm sure He understands. He understands we're sinful creatures. Listen, the hardest thing for us to do seems to be to start a new cycle of sane. Like eating healthy foods, getting a gym routine. Even the most beneficial habits to get us out of the drought are difficult to establish. But in order to experience God's promise, we just may need to do things much differently. And then we must become consistent until ultimately the breakthrough. That is, it becomes habit. We get rid of the drought. To go from drought to dream, start a new same. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. Start now. By the way, Jesus said, no one, that's you and me, no one, having put his hand to the plow, looking back, is fit for the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God. That's Luke chapter 9, verse 62. The way we'd say that today is don't procrastinate. Don't look back. You can't put God's kingdom off until tomorrow. Seize the day. Dare to start. The longer we're in the drought, the more power we give to the enemy over our future. However, once the habit's set, we'll have success. We can go from barren to breakthrough. We can go from drought to deluge if we'll simply start. I hope you ponder on this for a while. And until next time, God bless. Amen.